As an ESL healthcare professional, you have often been led to believe that your communication challenges or the root of your communication challenges are almost always due to language barriers or limitations. But from my observation and experience and expertise as a coach in this field, I'm going to tell you something very surprising. Most communication breakdowns that happen amongst healthcare professionals and their patients, it's not because of lack of grammatical accuracy or incorrect vocabulary, but it happens mainly because of how the conversations between you and your patients are structured and managed. I recently read a very interesting book about the importance and effectiveness required for modern day conversation. And I wanted to incorporate some of the lessons that I learned from that book that you can now absolutely apply as a healthcare professional. Welcome back to my channel, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me. As always, my name is Shweta. I am the founder of Healthy Dynamics. The coaching that I do is centered towards ESL healthcare professionals who speak a decent level of English, but it's not their first language, who work with patients on a daily basis, and who want to either eventually relocate and work in an English-speaking country or have recently already chosen to do so. So the coaching that I do is to really help you harness your communication skills in order for you to build trust, credibility, authority, and influence amongst an English-speaking patient base, ultimately for you to receive career progression, 5-star ratings, reviews, growing testimonials, and referrals, and for you to be seen as the authority figure in your field of medicine. So this year I made a promise to myself that I will be reading more than scrolling on social media. And so far this year I have read 3 books, which, if you do the math, it's like 1 book a month, which is not bad. And last month I read a book that has now become one of my all-time favorite books, and this is by Jefferson Fisher. I have spoken about Jefferson Fisher many times in my previous videos, which I'll link in the very end of this video. So Jefferson Fisher is a communication specialist. He's actually a trial lawyer from in Texas, but really what he talks about on his social media, on his whole online presence, and in particular this book, this talks about how to communicate better and reduce conflict in this day and age, regardless of what sort of field of or professional field you may be working in, and regardless of who you are. This book is one of the best books that I have ever read, and I loved it so much that I actually ended up reading it twice. And I'm going to eventually buy a copy of it. I just borrowed it from the library. Now, I would highly recommend this book to anyone, regardless of whether or not you're a healthcare professional or whatever your profession is. You are going to be communicating, whether it's with your colleagues, whether it's with your clients. In your personal life, you may be communicating with your family members. So that, and how to do that and dissolve conflict and come from a place of self-awareness, and how to sort of hone in on a lot of aspects that I talk about in my coaching, which is listening actively, emotional regulation, self-awareness, empathy, and validating another person's experience. He talks about exactly that. So I'm not going to go into the whole book and every single chapter, but I wanted to really cover 5 main key lessons that you can incorporate as an ESL healthcare professional that have been covered in this book that you can put into practice in order to build better trust and influence and authority with your patients. The takeaway I would say is that the goal of communication is to connect, not to win. And this was one of the strongest ideas that the book actually covered. Now, this is especially relevant in the healthcare industry. And I think nowadays when patients, they are much more cognizant and aware, and they're not as inclined to take your authority seriously than what they did 20, 30 years ago, because they see a lot of information on social media. I've made a video about that as well in the past, where that sort of clouds their knowledge and their judgment and their and logic in many ways. And they may question your diagnosis, and they can get quite emotional. If you looked at my video from last week, where I talked about how people like myself who are neurodivergent, we tend to be much more sensitive and emotional. And in situations like that, I have observed a lot of healthcare professionals, they become very defensive and they get into this defensive mode. They start to over-explain, they start to correct the patient, they start to dismiss them, and they really want to be proved right at any cost, no matter what. But in doing so, no one wins, and you as a healthcare professional lose the trust of your patients, and because your patient stops feeling heard. And this is a very critical mindset shift that you need to incorporate, definitely, because your goal during a consultation is not to demonstrate how much you know, but you need to be able to guide the communication, the interaction, and the conversation in such a way and lead it so that your patient feels understood and safe enough to accept your expertise and your guidance. And this ties very well with the communication leadership in consultations. And it's a huge part of the transformation that you will see when you start to work with me as a coach. So that's the very first lesson. The second one, I have beaten to death about this topic many, many times, but I'm going to say it again. I'm very glad that Jefferson Fisher also agrees with me on this, which is listening is the most underrated and yet the most valuable communication skills. Now, I've spoken about active listening many times, and I'm not going to go into that again. But the point being that active listening means you're not just waiting for your turn to speak, but absorbing and focusing on what the other person is trying to express and giving them the space to do that. At the same time, validate what they're saying, not just clarify whether you understood, but also validate it with the correct phrases. Now, this matters enormously in healthcare because you are coming and you're dealing with patients who are vulnerable, who are sick, who are injured, and their feelings may be something along the lines of fear, anxiety, confusion, and they have probably also been burned by many, many negative experiences in the past from other healthcare professionals. So in situations like this, when clinicians rush through explanations without listening deeply, attentively, it brings a sense of disempowerment and dismissal that a patient will experience, and which in turn turns them into becoming resistant, defensive, or they just completely shut down or disengage because they just don't see the point because they're never going to be taken seriously. And in particular, if you are an ESL healthcare professional working in an English-speaking setting, this also brings up a cultural challenge because the nuances and norms of communication, I'm not talking about language here, I'm talking about the nuances, the intricacies, and the norms of communication in different cultures is completely different. Now, in many, many Eastern cultures, which you may be, or the culture that you may come from, healthcare professionals are just automatically given respect, and they earn the authority of their patients just because of them being healthcare professionals. But in English-speaking settings, they are seen more as a teammate, more as a collaborator, and also a leader. And again, being a good leader means that you have to be able to listen and empathize with the people who you serve, in this case, your patients. And active listening signals respect, which enhances and builds the trust of your patients. Number 3, tone, delivery, and all the non-verbal cues matter infinitely more than words. I've said this many times. It's not just about what you say, but how you say it. And sometimes the message can be delivered in fewer words or no words at all. And things like toning, pacing, and emotional regulation, which I'll look into eventually in the 5th point, they will shape how the message that you're sending to the patient is being perceived and received. Now, in a healthcare setting, this is absolutely vital. Now, you can have 2 clinicians. So say, for example, you could be an OBGYN, let's just say. And I can give you an example of one of my friends who recently managed to get her tubes removed because she never wants to have children. She battled with this for 10 odd years, trying to find an OBGYN who will perform the procedure on her without giving her any pushback or put downs or trying to gaslight her or try to get her to change the mind. And that's what she experienced. In the past, when she went to different providers, even though they were what they were really doing was trying to talk her out of this procedure because they were too worried that she's going to change her mind. But the one who she ended up choosing was amazing, just as per the feedback that she shared with me. And the reason being that the provider who she eventually went with, who operated on her, had the correct tone of voice, listened actively, understood and validated her concerns and what she was saying, paced her words appropriately, and had very strong emotional presence, complemented with really positive body language. Now, this is particularly important for you as an ESL healthcare professional because many people, such as yourself, worry about, again, like I said in the very beginning, the accent and the vocabulary. But the reality is a lot of people can let you get away with that, but not if you are not using the non-verbal cues appropriately and you are coming across as being cold, dismissive, and it's like completely disengaged. So using a calm tone, a steady presence, and clear structure are all the elements that will give patients the confidence that they can actually trust you and they'll be able to take you seriously, and whatever explanation that you're giving them in terms of the information that you're providing will be received in a much more positive manner. Number 4, say less but say it clearly. Clarity is something that I have been working heavily on LinkedIn and just in my everyday life, and that's actually my word of the year actually. So it's much more important than for you to, instead of beating around the bush and going around in circles, say fewer words but be very, very clear about the message that you are delivering. Because too much information, especially I think as healthcare professionals, you tend to go into that over-explaining mode, especially when the patient is already confused. That just adds to the confusion when you do that. And this is very common. I've observed this in ESL healthcare professionals. And the reason why they do this is an unconscious response because they want to make sure that their patients fully understand what they're saying. And as a result of that, they ended up giving them long-winded explanations with a lot of technical detail, which is very overwhelming for a patient, and they just shut down. Now, as someone who has ADHD, I can relate to this because even in a non-healthcare setting, this is what happens to me. And you're just left with more confusion and feeling much more unsure. Whereas the strong and the most effective communicators, they will say very little, but whatever they say will make perfect sense and will be accurately be received by their audience. They highlight the most important points, they simplify, and they pause to check understanding. And it's about making the message easier to absorb, digest, and comprehend, which is a sign of very clear communication. And finally, like I mentioned just a while ago, emotional regulation is what sets the foundation of any conversation. Now, I've spoken about emotional intelligence, emotional regulation many, many times before. This ties very well with self-awareness. That's one of the very first things that I coach my clients on. And why is emotional regulation important? Obviously, you are working with patients who are emotional and vulnerable, but irrespective of that, when conversations become tense, the instinct is for you to become reactive very quickly, and you sort of start to be louder, more vocal, you become defensive, and you start correcting the other person. Whereas the right thing to do in a situation like this, so that the de-escalation is what you need to address first and foremost, and that is to pause, slow the pace of the reaction, and respond rather than react. And this is essential when you're delivering diagnoses that may be quite difficult, addressing patient complaints, taking care of family members during emotional moments when, say, someone has had a terminal illness diagnosis or any kind of bad news that you may have delivered, and there may also be disagreements about the treatment plan. So in these situations, when a clinician remains calm and grounded and emotionally regulated and centered, it changes the whole vibe and the atmosphere of the conversation, because the patients, they feel safer. It gives them less ammunition to get even more reactive and feel even more vulnerable. So, and also conversations will de-escalate and productive dialogue will be possible. And that's why communication mastery is not just about language. It's, like I said in the very beginning, about leadership in conversation and in communication. So what I really loved about this book is that it resonates very much with my messaging through LinkedIn and YouTube. That it's not just about clever vocabulary words, communication. It's about presence, clarity, connection, and emotional intelligence. And for ESL healthcare professionals, this is a very, very empowering lesson, because this is the foundation for how you build trust with your patients through the best forms of communication. And you will end up structuring your conversation in a way that builds trust, influence, and authority. And mastering those skills will lead to your patients taking you more seriously and smoother consultations, and your confidence as a healthcare professional will grow. So like I said in the beginning, I would highly recommend anyone to read this book, whether you're a healthcare professional or otherwise, if you want to become a better communicator, to connect better with everyone else around you. Jefferson Fisher is also actually coming, doing a book tour in the city where I'm based, so I'm looking forward to seeing him in person live. And in the meantime, to stay in touch and be updated with the content on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. Leave this video a like and your thoughts and comments in the comment section below. I will leave the link to Jefferson Fisher's social media accounts in the description box, as well as if you want to purchase a copy of his book, feel free to do that as well. And as always, thank you very much for your time, attention, and presence. I shall see you next time. Right this very second. The first take...